Hi, I'm Laura from Everyday Adventurous Images, and this is a video tutorial series on creating bespoke movement artwork with Snapseed. In the series, I'm going to share with you all of my hints, tips, and photo editing secrets on how to turn shots like these into works of movement art like these. So, how does it work? The series comprises of 8 video tutorials split into 3 parts. In the first part, creating your image, step-by-step guides will show you how to use Snapseed to stitch together your photos to create the 3 different types of movement images that I use most often: burst shots, shadow shots, and echo shots. In the second part, adding style, are 3 guides dedicated to using the looks and editing tools within Snapseed to create your own signature styles, including a dedicated guide to creating colour splash images. In the third part, Getting Technical, are 2 bonus guides which will help to make your photo editing life so much easier. These guides will enable you to consistently produce high-quality edits in a fraction of the time. This is Tutorial 1, Burst Shots. Just a quick reminder before we get going. Make sure that you've already watched my video guide, Taking Bursts and Starting with Snapseed, which means that you will already have your burst photos saved and you've downloaded the Snapseed app and are ready to go. If not, it's in the YouTube playlist right before this video, so go check it out, then come straight back here. A couple of hints and tips before we get started. This tutorial course uses screen recordings of the Snapseed app in action, so you can follow along and create masterpieces on your phone as you watch. Tip 1. Watch on your laptop. These videos have been optimised for desktop, laptop or tablet, and watching in this way allows you to keep your phone free to create your masterpiece. Tip 2. Pause and rewind to catch up. Please pause these videos as often as you like. It'll help you to start to learn the functions and processes, rather than just furiously tapping along in real time. And if you miss anything, or want to take a breather to catch up, just skip back and watch again. And tip 3, touchscreen controls. Snapseed is a touchscreen app and all the controls and navigations are made using 1 or 2 fingertips on the screen. So before we get started, I just want to give you a few quick pointers, as so much of what we're going to do in these videos relies on this fingertip navigation. Tap to select. Tapping words and icons on screen with your fingertip opens menus and new screens. For example, tapping Tools opens the Tools menu, and tapping Double Exposure opens the Double Exposure screen. Drag sliders. Dragging sliders to the left and right with your fingertip increases and decreases the intensity of the effect. For example, dragging the opacity slider to the left decreases the effect, and to the right increases it. Pinch to zoom. Using 2 fingers in a pinching motion will zoom in and out on an image. For example, to zoom in, place your finger and thumb together on screen and move them apart. And to zoom out, just pinch your finger and thumb closer together. 2 fingers to move. Moving a zoomed image around on screen to allow you to focus on a particular area requires you to place 2 fingertips on the screen and drag to move the image around. And one final tip. This box at the bottom left of the screen appears when you zoom in. It's a navigation box, and if you touch the area within it, your screen will move to that area of the image. My advice is to avoid touching it at all costs. I don't find it sensitive enough to use as a navigation tool, and if you accidentally touch it, your screen can jump, invariably just as you are getting into a particularly intricate bit of editing. Okay, now we're ready to get going. This is tutorial number 1, burst shots. How to create stunning images by stitching together your favourite burst photos. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how I stitched together 3 shots from the running burst I took in How to Take Brilliant Burst Photos. And by following these 4 simple, repeatable steps, you'll be able to create burst shots of your very own in just the same way. Step 1, we choose our base image. Step 2, we use the double exposure tool to add each photo as a new layer. Step 3, we use the mask tool to paint in just the area of each photo that we want to include in our final image. And in step 4, I'll share my top tips for getting a professional finish for your images every single time. Step 1, choosing your base image. So you've taken your burst shots and saved your favourites. Now what? You need to choose a shot to use as your base image. This will be the one onto which you stitch all your other photos. So, first, study your shots. I've decided to use 3 photos for my burst shot, but you can use as many as you like. I think the most I've used so far is 7. Next, choose your base. If one of your images stands out as more complex than the others, maybe it's got a more complicated background or has, say, tree branches overlapping the shot, then it makes sense to choose that one as your base. Otherwise, I default to using the image where the subject is closest to the camera. So now you've made your choice, you can open Snapseed by tapping the icon on your home screen. And then once Snapseed is open, you can open your base image by tapping Open in the top left-hand corner. If you haven't used Snapseed before, or not for a while at least, you might also have a big plus icon in the middle of the screen, which you can also tap to open your photos. Then tap Open from Device to open up your phone photos. And locate your base image from your albums. I saved mine in an album called Burst, but yours will probably be in Recents. So tap to open it and tap to open your base image. Now we've chosen and opened up our base image, we can move on to step 2. Using the double exposure tool to load up our second image. To do this, we select double exposure, which is located in the Tools menu at the bottom centre of your screen. So tap Tools and then drag the screen upwards with your finger until you see the double exposure icon, which you can then tap. This will open up the double exposure screen, and you'll see that the image icon, the bottom left, is the only one of the 3 icons that is not greyed out. This is the icon that will load up your second image. Tap it, and then find and select your second image. Remember, mine is in my burst album, but yours will probably be in recents. When your second image opens, you'll see that it is overlaid on top of your first image. This allows you to check that both images are perfectly lined up. Misaligned images happen quite often if you move the camera around whilst taking your bursts. To line them up, gently drag the second image with your fingertip to sit perfectly on top of the first. Once the shots are aligned, you can then tap the opacity icon and drag the slider all the way to the right to 100%, as you want each stitched shot to be 100% visible in the final image. And once you've done all of that, click the Done tick. So now we've opened up our first two burst shots, we're now on to step 3, using the mask tool to stitch them together. This is where the magic happens. So, tap the View Edits icon at the top of your screen and tap View Edits from the menu. This opens up a list of the edits we've made so far. As we've only made one edit so far, double exposure is the only edit in the list. So tap that one and then tap the center icon, which is the mask icon. This is the key to stitching your images together. The mask icon allows us to paint in just the bits of the second image that we want to see. In this case, just the runner. So first we can check the exact position of the runner by tapping the invert icon. And then again to revert back. I'm then going to tap the eye icon on the bottom right, just so that you can see exactly where I'm painting in the image on the screen. Then you just paint with your fingertip where you think the runner should be and be sure to cover the whole of the runner as you paint. There we go, that looks great. And then we can go ahead and neaten up the edges. To do this, we need to use zoom to get in really close. So pinch those finger and thumb apart and zoom right in. We'll then tap the eye icon again to show you exactly where we can erase the painting. And we're going to use the center arrows to move the percentage of double exposure from 100 all the way down to 0. And we can then just use our fingertip, as we did before, but this time to trace around the outside of the image, removing all of the red that we painted in earlier. As close to the outside lines as we can. To move around the screen, we just use 2 fingers to drag our image across the screen. And we can pinch in and out to make sure that we remove all of the red, both close to the runner and in the outlying areas. Once we've gone all the way around, we can just zoom out and clean up any areas that we haven't quite got, and then continue to zoom right out. We can tick the eye to show us what our picture looks like. And then when we're done, we'll just tap the done tick and tap back. If you accidentally go over a line or erase an area you want to keep, don't panic. Just use the arrows to change the double exposure percentage from 0 back up to 100 and paint the area back in with your fingertip. Then change the double exposure percentage back down to 0 and carry on neatening up your edges. Now we've stitched in our second image, it's time to go back to step 2 and use the double exposure tool again to load up our third image. So, we select double exposure again by tapping Tools, then dragging the Tools menu upwards and tapping the double exposure icon. This opens up the double exposure screen, and you can then tap the image icon and find your third image in Albums. Remember, mine is in the Burst album, but yours will probably be in Recents. When your third image appears, check that it lines up with the image underneath and gently move it on screen with your fingertip if not. Once the shots are aligned, you can then tap the opacity icon and drag the slider all the way to the right to 100%. And then tap the done tick. So now we've loaded up our third and final image, we're back to step 3, using the mask tool to stitch it together with our first and second shots. We'll do this in exactly the same way as we stitched in our second image. So, tap the View Edits icon at the top of the screen and tap View Edits from the menu. This opens up a list of the edits we've made so far. As you'll see, our latest double exposure edit is at the top of the list, so we can tap that one and then tap the mask icon in the centre. This allows us to just paint in the bits of the third image we want to see. So check the position of the runner by tapping the invert icon and then again to revert back. Then I'm going to tap the eye icon so you can see where I'm painting. And then, as before, we're just going to paint in with our fingertip, being sure to cover the whole of the runner. Then we can zoom right in and use the arrows to reduce the percentage double exposure from 100 to 0. So we can trace around the outer edges of the runner to get as neat a finish as we can. Remember, drag 2 fingers across the screen to move the image around and use 1 fingertip for painting. Then pinch the screen to zoom out and tidy up any areas that are still showing in red. And then once you're done, tap the Done tick and tap back. So now we've stitched together all of our shots, it's time to move on to step 4, getting a professional finish. So now we know how to stitch our burst photos together and our image is looking pretty good. But how do we turn it from pretty good to awesome? How do we get that super professional finish we want so we can share these images with confidence? Well, here are my top 4 tips for next level stitching. Tip 1. Use the eye icon. As you know, we've used the eye icon a lot in this tutorial, as it's an easy way for me to show you exactly where I'm painting on the screen. But it's also a powerful tool for checking how neat your edges are, as this can make a huge difference to the quality of your finished image. So here's a little recap. As you've seen, we just tap the icon and set our double exposure percentage to 0 using the arrows. This turns our paint area red so we can see exactly where we've painted, and we can neaten up the edges by brushing a finger along the outside of the outline, getting as close as we can without touching the lines. Move your image around by placing 2 fingers together on the screen and just dragging them along to the next section. And again, it's handy for seeing any accidental brushes with the screen too, as I've done here at the top. To get rid of these, just use the arrows to change the double exposure percentage from 0 to 100 and paint the area back in. Then change the double exposure percentage back down to 0 and carry on neatening up your edges. And there we go. Tip 2 is to use the invert function, a clever little icon which, once tapped, highlights any areas of the image that we've missed stitching in, or if we've gone over any of the lines whilst neatening them up. So, after stitching, we tap the invert icon on the bottom left of the screen and see what we've missed. So we've got bits missing at the head, the feet, and the front hand. So we can tap the invert icon again to flip back to our image, zoom right in by pinching out with our fingertips, tap invert again to check where we need to focus, and then very gently use our fingertip to brush those areas in, making sure the double exposure percentage is set to 100% first. And gently brush as close as possible to the edge, but try not to go over the edge. Quick check, couple more bits and a little bit closer to the edge. Brush again really gently with your fingertip. Once we're happy with the head, we can drag the screen to the back foot with 2 fingers. Tap the invert icon to check where we're missing. Tap again to get back to our main screen. And then really gently brush in the edges. Great. And we can zoom out, drag the screen over to the front foot. And see a tiny bit of sole that we're missing. Zoom right in. Brush really gently on that line of the sole. Great. And last but not least, drag the screen up to the hand. Tap the invert icon to check where we're missing. Tap again. And really gently paint in that hand. Perfect. So, tip 3 is keep the shadows. Sometimes our stitched images can look like they're floating in space rather than being grounded to the earth. One of the major reasons is that we haven't painted in the shadows. If we look at this image, we can see that our original base image on the right is grounded at the front foot with its shadow, whilst the second image appears to be floating a little without its shadow. If we tap the invert icon, we can see exactly where the shadow should be and where we need to paint it in. Painting in a shadow takes a bit of practice and might involve a little trial and error at first. Some shadows are stark and well defined and can be painted in just like your subject. Some, however, have a much less well-defined edge, like this one, and are a little more difficult to get a natural look. But by zooming out a little and touching the screen very gently to allow a little blurring of the edges, you'll get as natural a finish as possible. So very gently brush with your fingertip, as lightly as you can, just where you think it's needed. And once you're happy, just zoom out. And there you can see the second runner now looks grounded to the beach rather than floating around in midair. Tip 4 is save and export. My final tip is around understanding the various save and export options within Snapseed. When we're completely happy with our image, we can then save, export, or share it. To do this, we simply tap Export at the bottom right of the screen, and the menu of export options appears. So at the top, we have Share and Open In. Both of these options allow us to directly share or open our image in other apps, which is great, but I prefer to save my image to Photos first and then decide about sharing and posting on social media from there, so I don't use these options. Next up is Save. This option permanently saves our edited image over our original photo. I prefer to keep a copy of my original photos, as well as my edited versions, so again, I avoid this option. Then we have Save a Copy. This allows us to save a copy of our image with edits that we can undo, change, and redo. This is a great option if we want to work on the image again in the future, but it can be temperamental. Depending on the complexity of the edit, I sometimes get a "computer says no, photo not saved" message when trying to save in this format. Which brings me on to Export. This option saves a permanent copy of your edited image into Photos, where your edits can't be changed, reverted, or overwritten. This is the option I use to save all of my finished edits. So once you've made your choice, just tap it You'll see the app working away to save your edits, and you'll get confirmation when it's done. And that's it. Now you know how to create your very own burst shot by following my 4 simple steps. Choosing your base image, using the double exposure tool to add each photo as a new layer, using the mask tool to stitch together just the parts of each photo that you want to include, and finally, you now know my top tips for getting a professional finish for your movement images every single time. So, what next? Now you've completed the burst shots tutorial and you have all the know-how to create burst shots of your very own. Next, you can choose to complete the 2 remaining creating your image tutorials, shadow shots and echo shots. Or you can skip straight on over to the adding style tutorials to discover the magic that using looks, tools and colour splash can add to your burst shot images. Then what? Share your images on Instagram using the hashtag #MoveSnappers. I'd love to see your burst images and I'll happily give you pointers on there too. And if you want my help creating bespoke images from your photos, just head on over to the website everydayadventurous.com/images to commission me to create your very own work of movement art. Bye for now, Move Snappers!